I have with me here today is Steve Kaplan, and Steve has written the book, The Tools of Comedy, among other things that he has done in his life, which is lots of screenwriting and lots of comedy stuff. And that book came out in 2013 and became an instant hit, instant bestseller. And I have to tell you, I wish I had the book, but I realized last night I had been reading it on Kindle, which I don't usually do. But I went to Dallas this week and I was reading it on my flight, and I downloaded it, and then I read it again this week. But it was on Kindle.
Wait 1 second.
You have it?
You mean this?
Yay! There we go. I thought of it yesterday, and I'm like, Amazon's quick, but they're not that quick. So. Very good. That is it. The Hidden Tools of Comedy. And
Beauty Shot.
Yes, Beauty Shot. I have read through it at least 3 times since I got it. And what I suggest people do is you read it for the fun, because it's a fun book. And then once you read it through and you realize, wow, I really don't know what I'm thinking about with comedy. You know, I've always, in my brain, I go to comedies, but when I think about writing, I'm always writing dramas in my head, even on paper. But I have learned such an appreciation for writing comedy. You have made me, now I watch it and I can't stop thinking about I think that everybody thinks it's easy or something. Like a drama's hard and a comedy's easy. But I think it's very difficult now. Like I can't even, I can't even understand what a comedy writer must go through. To write a movie like Big or Groundhog Day and, make it funny, but make it it's given me a whole new perspective of it. So thank you. I want to thank you for.
Oh, you're welcome. It's even harder because there's the thought that comedy doesn't travel, it doesn't go to international markets. So the movies that you reference, Big and Groundhog Day, 80s and 90s. But if you look at the IMDb gross chart, the only comedies that are written are animated or R-rated.
Right.
So it's actually even harder.
That's what I was thinking.
Hard to write and hard to produce.
Hard, yeah, and I think that people are really critical when you go to see a comedy. You can walk out and go, yeah, I laughed in the middle. Because you're so set up that you're going to sit there and laugh the entire time that you got to walk out. And I think people are very critical of comedies, and I think it's hard to win an Oscar right with a comedy. Don't they always say that?
The last one was, am I right about this? Annie Hall, was that the last comedy best picture? I could be wrong about that, but it's been a long time, and if it's been something since Annie Hall, it's only been one. It is hard because I'm not sure that people think that comedy is easy, but I think that they think comedy is not important. And that's where I disagree. The book is called The Hidden Tools of Comedy, and it's more about kind of giving writers and performers and directors and producers and executives a number of discrete, practical, usable, workable tools that they can use in working on a comedy. I'm actually working on a new book now, which is about story structure for feature films for comedies called The Comic Hero's Journey. Because
nice.
if there's anything I want to do more, it's to rip off my good friend Chris Vogler, who wrote The Writer's Journey, and ride on his back. And,
Awesome. Well, I'm really happy to hear that because I will read it. Okay. Your writing is, I've watched every episode of Seinfeld, and you had me going back and rewatching, when you think you know everything about, a show, and then reading your book, you're like, that's not what I was thinking. And then it gives it a whole new meaning behind what they were doing, so I so appreciate it as a fan, So what Steve and I are going to do, I watched the movie Groundhog Day last night, and
my favorite.
And you said it was your favorite movie at the end of the book.
My favorite comedy.
Your favorite comedy, right?
My favorite comedy of the last 30 years.
Okay. And so I thought it would be fun to go through some of your tools of comedy using the movie Big, because using the movie Groundhog Day, because I think that it would be, like it would really give people an idea of what the tools are and what they have to hit, to make a comedy work the way. Well, and Big, I mean, the reason I say Big is because you mentioned Big throughout the whole book, and Big and Groundhog Day were the two that I related to the most. So
it also shows how old I am.
Well, it kind of shows how old I am too, because I,
so for all you young writers out there, forgive me for living before 1980. Okay, so
right.
Some of my references are Big, Groundhog Day, Seinfeld.
You know what? Though
I'll write another book, and I'll put it. It'll all be about Big Bang Theory and How I Met My Mother.
Right. Oh my, yeah. No kidding. That would be really good too. But I think that everybody, I mean, especially with the power of Netflix and Amazon, I mean, they can see Seinfeld and they can see reruns, and I think it's just as relevant today
sure.
that and same with Big and Groundhog Day. I know my kids have all seen it, and they're young, so they're younger than us. So, right. Okay, so the first tool of comedy is winning. And I love that because I never, ever thought of that before. I love that. I love that chapter. I never thought of course, there's the hero's journey, but I never thought of that. The character has permission to win. It has to, so when I looked at Bill Murray in that role, it was like, what does Bill Murray want?
Right, and he's given the permission to go for it, especially when he comes to the conclusion that he is, in fact, living the same day over and over again. And so one of the things he does is as soon as he realizes that whatever he does has no consequence, he can wake up the next morning and it says, so he didn't do it. He walks down the street, and the Stephen Tobolowsky, who plays the obnoxious insurance salesman, comes running up to him and says, Phil, whatever his last name is, and Bill Murray just goes, Ned, and he just punches him,
right,
without any prologue, without any dialogue to set it up. He just does it. Comedy gives you the permission to do what you need to do in order to win, as far as your character goes. And so you see the character doing that a lot. There's the whole sequence when he's trying to pick up Andy McDowell.
Right.
And because of the time warp that Groundhog Day has, he's allowed to make a mistake, then he comes back the next day and he fixes it. And, he takes her out for beer, and he says, well, what did you go to college for? And she says, I studied 18th century French poetry. And you know, what a waste of time. And of course, that's exactly the wrong thing to say. But then you cut to the very next scene is the exact same setup. And he says, what did you go to college for? And she says, 18th century French poetry. And then the camera does a big close-up of him, and he goes, he says recites some beautiful French poem in French, because he has the ability to just do what he needs to do in order to win. He went up and he memorized a French poem, and when she says, you speak French, he goes, oui. Because he's just making it up. I think one of the essential tools that, if you want to talk about Groundhog Day and understand it, why I think it's one of the best comedy films of the last 30, 50 years, is the idea of comic premise. Comic premise is the tool that says that in a comedy, you get to lie once. You get to create an impossible or improbable situation that could never happen, or probably could never happen. But if it did happen, what would happen then? But after that initial lie, you have to play it straight. And that's one of the brilliance of Groundhog Day, is that once they're shooting it, they're in this small town in Ohio that's standing in for Punxsutawney. And once they're shooting it, they realize that they don't have to make it quote unquote funnier than it is. All they have to do is explore what would really happen if this situation actually happened. Right. The best example of that is in day 2 of Phil Connor's journey. Mm-hmm. He's in his hotel room. He's on the phone. He can't get out of Punxsutawney because there's a blizzard. Somebody says, well, you can try tomorrow. He says, tomorrow? There wasn't one today. And he hangs up. And according to the script, according to the original script, he shaves his head into a mohawk. He paints half the room. He sets fire to the other half. He trashes the room, and they shot it. And then when they looked at it, Harold Ramis and Bill Murray, and the people making the film, they kind of said to themselves, why would he do that? Why would he do that? It makes no sense. It's funny, but it's unnecessary and it's against the character. So the other tool, so that's the tool of winning. Characters are given the permission to do what they need to do in order to win. He doesn't need to shave his head into a mohawk. Why would he want to?
Right.
So they reshot the scene at great expense. They reshot the scene, and it just became a pencil. And he takes a pencil and he breaks it in half. And he puts one end down on the floor and the other end on the night table. And when he wakes up to Sonny and Cher singing, I Got You, Babe, he picks it up and he realizes it's really happening. And so in that simple moment, they took away all the mess that are usually in so many comedy films where you have to do something funny. And they just decided to honor the character. Another thing that's in the book is, kind of the thumbnail depth. An ordinary guy struggling against insurmountable odds without many of the required tools with which to win, yet never giving up hope. And the whole truth about comedy is that comedy, even more than drama, I know that you write drama, but comedy tells the truth. Comedy tells the truth about who we are. Drama is wonderful. Drama is a wonderful, beautiful dream. Would that we were that soulful and that sensitive to live that way. And some people do. I guess Mother Teresa did.
Right.
But most of us just bumble through our lives, making the best of what we can, making mistakes, and cutting corners, and being human. And so that's what comedy does. Comedy is the art of telling the truth about what it's like to be human.
And I thought that's what was so awesome watching it this time as an older person, was that he was, not even knowing the part about shaving.
You young thing.
Okay. He would, seeing that he was human, like I didn't even know about that shot with the shaving the head, but you're right. I think that would have broken character, where he went through like the 5 stages of grief is what I want to say.
Exactly.
When like you find out something has happened and he went through the anger, first it was anger, then it was sadness.
It's denial.
Or denial.
It's not happening.
Right. This can't be happening. And then he proves it. Okay, it is happening. And then anger, and then sad, and then, I don't know. Negotiation, right.
That's when he figures, if I just bang every girl in town.
Right.
Finding out information about her and then coming back the next day and pretending that we know each other from high school.
Right.
That's how he robs the Wells Fargo truck.
Yes.
And then when he decides that what he really wants is Rita, Andie MacDowell, she's not somebody who's going to just jump into bed with somebody. So she rejects him over and over and over. And no matter how hard he tries, she slaps him and slaps him and slaps him. And then you have the section which is depression.
Right.
In which he kills himself.
Multiple times. And then finally there's acceptance. And acceptance is actually 3 beats, because there's first the acceptance, it's happening, he gets Rita to accept that it's happening, and then he tries to save the old man. There's the whole sequence where the old man dies over and over again. Right.
And the studio, again, wanted them to cut it because, why are you bumming us out? It's a comedy. But again, because a comedy isn't just a setup and jokes. A comedy is something that's propelled by character and theme. Mm-hmm. And the theme is, how can you be a good person in the world? So it was important for Phil to realize, even though he's got this thing that's happening to him, he's not a god. He can't stop people from dying. He's just human. And so there's the sequence in which the old man dies, and they do it very, very simply and very beautifully. He just looks up to heaven, kind of acknowledging, accepting, I'm stuck here and I'm mortal, but I'm living the same day over and over again. And finally, the third part of acceptance is him just accepting that his lot in life is to do for others. And so he spends the whole day, he catches the kid who falls from the tree.
Right.
He fixes the flat. He gives a Heimlich maneuver to the mayor, who's actually, played by his mother. And he loves Rita, and he's accepted that he might love her for eternity and never have her, because she'll wake up the next day and she won't remember any of it.
And yeah, I guess I always used to think, when I watched it before this, is that the message, if you want to say, at the end of the movie was kind of a love conquers all. When he really felt it, not when he was faking it, not when he was trying to, win her over by faking who he was, but when he actually was. But last night I was like, I think it's about the acceptance, like you said. I think it is about, like, he accepted his life, and the minute he accepted it, it was okay. And I swear I laid in bed last night going, wow, if we all could just do that. You just accept it. It was such I don't know why, I guess a younger, but it really, really hit me. And I wanted to see if you thought, what you thought of that.
Well, it's one of the reasons why the film has been adopted by every religious order. Danny Rubin, who wrote the original screenplay, who co-wrote the film with Harold Ramis, said he would get letters from priests who said, this is the perfect Catholic movie. Letters from rabbis, this is the perfect Jewish movie. Letters from Hindu monks, this is the best Buddhist movie or Hindu movie, because it has such a spiritual heart to it. It doesn't undercut its thematic truth for a joke, which I guess is another one of the lessons, is that you can write a comedy without having to worry about how funny it is all the time. If you can just make it honest, without belaboring the theme, you can have a successful movie. I mean, and if you look at Pixar accomplishes that, because in many Pixar and Disney movies, there's death. Your characters are dealing with death, which is a very serious subject, and they don't belittle that, and they don't make light of it. They just show how characters deal with it, and whether it's Bambi or Finding Nemo, which starts with the death of the mother and his 10,000 brothers and sisters, and how do you deal with that? And so I think one of the powers of Groundhog Day is it has this strong thematic core, which gives you an uplifting spiritual message without kind of belaboring it or hitting you over the head with it.
Exactly.
You also have, if we're going to talk about tools, there's the tool of one of my favorite discoveries in this lifelong exploration of what comedy is, why it works, how it works, what's going on when it's not working, and what can you do to fix it, is the tool of straight line, wavy line. The idea
I'm glad you
want
to talk about that.
Isn't just watching somebody do something silly,
right?
But comedy is watching somebody do something silly. And if you look at Groundhog Day, there's a lot of sequences in which Bill Murray is doing something weird, and you have one of the smaller characters, one of the secondary characters, simply kind of looking and going like, what? During the Depression sequence, he's watching a game of Jeopardy,
right?
And since he's watched it 2,500 times, he knows all the answers.
Yes.
And so he's drinking straight out of a bourbon bottle and he's answering all the questions. And the landlady, this nice landlady who's constantly being flummoxed and befuddled by Bill Murray, is kind of just looking at him like, what? So there's the idea of straight line, wavy line, that it's important that in many scenes there's a character who's human, who is kind of maybe not even in on the joke, but kind of just confused by it. And then there's the idea of non-hero, which is that if your characters are non-heroic, that means that they lack skills. And one of the basic skills is knowing, is being aware or self-aware. So that's a very important skill, because in a romantic comedy, you have to have the romance. You can't just have silly, 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 and then a big romantic move. So what happens is that if you want us to laugh at Bill Murray, you make him, you take away skills. You make him less empathetic. You make him less diplomatic. You make him kind of cynical and caustic and mean-spirited. But if you want us to see him as a romantic lead, you do what he does in the wooing sequence with Rita. He becomes sensitive, he becomes aware, he becomes romantic, he becomes caring, and all those attributes decrease the comic element in the scene and increase the dramatic element. So you can't have a movie that's all comedy. I mean, maybe you could have a short, maybe you could have a sketch, but if you're going to sustain truth for over an hour and a half or 2 hours, there has to be something. It has to mean something. It has to have some weight. And so the best comedy is always some mixture of comedy and drama.
Right. And I loved when you said that too, about the wavy line, straight line, when I was watching Seinfeld, because I never realized that it wasn't Kramer that I was laughing at. Or you could even say Laverne and Shirley. You know, any of those duos, like, I realize now it was the reaction. You're looking to the person who's reacting.
Well, it's teamwork. It's
right.
Not just, the whole idea is that it's not just one. It's not just somebody doing something silly. And when I started this years ago, I thought that this was an apparent truth that everybody knew. And I was teaching young actors, and I thought I was giving a secret to young actors and young writers, but everybody knew this. But as I went through things, I realized, no, not everybody knows this, and that's why on sitcoms you'll have a table read on a Monday and have secondary characters or day players have a funny line, but on Wednesday all those funny lines are given to the stars, because they have the mistaken belief that since they're the main characters, they have to do all the comedy.
Right.
And in fact, if you look at the best sitcoms, and I would put not only Seinfeld, but I would put Everybody Loves Raymond. Mm-hmm. Because if you look at the best comedy, what Ray Romano was brilliant at is letting other people have the focus and letting him just be sometimes speechless, not know what to say in the moment, as opposed to always having to be the center of attention, always having to be the person with the funny line.
Right. Absolutely. And now it's like so clear to me. And that's why your book is so awesome, because it makes things that we took for granted, you know, is like, I took so for granted when I watched those episodes what I was laughing at. Now I actually know that without somebody there, you aren't all alone. I mean, as a comedian is a comedian, but getting the reaction is what, and your way you pointed out the landlady, she was awesome, because she is watching him every day, and her reactions to him leading up to the Jeopardy scene, even, you know, you're like watching her just watch him and be like, okay, he's crazy, you know, what a great role she had, you know, she really set him up well, I thought. So
because there needs to be, in every scene, I believe, even if it's not straight line, wavy line, because there's lots of comedies that don't have that technique or tool in it. Remember, it's a tool, it's not a method. Mm-hmm. But in every scene, there needs to be a human being. You can't just have craziness, which is why I would argue that the Three Stooges, never had a really outstanding feature film because at times in which they were all idiots, and you didn't, except for Shemp, who was my favorite Stooge. You didn't
Right.
care about any of them. You were amused by them, but you didn't care about any of them. In a long form story, or even in a half-hour story, you need to care about somebody. You need to empathize. You need to connect with somebody. Even if they're going to be an idiot in the next moment, for a second, somebody's got to be human. Somebody's got to carry the humanity in the moment. One of the things that we say is that you can't have Mork without Mindy.
Right. I even wrote that down. I even wrote it down.
You can't have comedy
right
without some balance to it. You can't have silliness unless there's some person who is a truth teller, who just says what is. One of my favorite contemporary movies is Spy, and if you look at Spy, you have this great Abbott and Costello duo with Melissa McCarthy and Jason Statham, because Jason Statham is an idiot, and she's always like saying, "Really, you really what? What are you talking about?" And he's oblivious to it. And listen, Melissa McCarthy is no slouch at comedy,
right?
But she lets him be the idiot so she can just react and say what's on her mind, speak the truth.
Yeah, even when she was in that movie with Sandra Bullock, which I can't remember the name of it, where they
The Heat, which is also yes. Very funny. She's also very funny.
Yeah, she allows Sandra Bullock to be very funny too, which I thought was that was why that worked so well.
Actually, in my opinion, Melissa McCarthy made Sandra Bullock look pretty funny.
Yeah, right. And the only one of the Tool number 7, Archetype. Now, that was the only one that I was really confused about, and I read that chapter several times, and I was like, I need to ask him, like, exactly.
That was my point, to confuse you.
I thought I need more in order to I'm not getting this, trying to understand it in myself.
There's another book out in the market, the 8 Characters of Comedy, and I wrote my book without referring to that book, but I mean, basically, you're talking about archetypes. You're talking about identifiable types that you don't have to create a 15-page biography for to understand what's going on. Are you familiar with the movie Office Space?
Yes.
It's a movie about a guy, in an office job, and he hates it. And the guy who plays the boss, he goes, "Yeah," he comes out with his cup of coffee. He goes, we're gonna go on Saturday. Yeah, that passive aggressive. We know who that guy is. You don't have to. We don't have to see him get up in the morning and kiss his wife and kick the dog to understand who that guy is. He's an archetype, not a stereotype.
Okay.
Because archetypes are 3-dimensional. They have the ability to change. But what an archetype is somebody who has a basic worldview, a basic approach or attack in the script, and that sets things in motion. So, you can I use Commedia dell'arte as a good reference point for the whole idea that characters create comedy and plot. So, for instance, in the Commedia, you might have the 2 young lovers, and then there's the Pantalone, who's the lecherous old man. So if you put 2 young lovers on a bench, what is there? And they're both good looking, and both a little bit dim. What's their physical movement?
What's their physical movement?
Yeah, what do they physically do? No dialogue. They're 2 young lovers. They kind of like each other. What do? What's the action?
Move closer to each other.
Move closer to each other, maybe to kiss, right?
Right.
So let's take away the young man. Let's put in the Pantalone, the lecherous old man, and they're sitting on a park bench. So what does the lecherous old man do?
He might want to sit closer, but the other person's kind of right.
And what does the young girl do?
Moving away.
She moves away. So maybe they're chasing each other around the bench. Now let's take away the young woman. Let's put in the battle axe wife. And what does she do?
She's moving. Wow.
She
Oh,
faces
she's
him.
facing him.
The
Yes,
other way
right.
around the bench.
Right.
So archetypes show that character creates plot, character creates action, character creates physical movement. And so if you have, you can look at this if you watch a Kaplan short. Kaplan is like a classic Arlecchino. Arlecchino was the servant in the Commedia who was like a child, a man child, who had very primal needs and desires. Sex, food. And you'll see a Kaplan going after food, going after women, kicking guys in the butt if they get in their way. And those needs, those desires create movements, and those desires are embodied in an archetype. So the archetypes you want to look for is who's the trickster? Who in your cast is the trickster who's going to color outside the lines, who's going to mess things up, who's not going to play by the rules? Who's the innocent? Sometimes the innocent is also the rookie, the person who sees the world through new eyes, which helps the audience see through new eyes. Who's the idiot? The moron. Who is the object of desire? So you don't have to think about the Commedia. You can think of who's the fool, who's the voice of reason. And if you look at Groundhog Day, Bill Murray is definitely the trickster, whereas Andie MacDowell is the innocent. She looks at this town and says, people are singing, they're dancing,
I was just going to
having
say
a great time. They're Groundhog Day, and he goes, because they're idiots.
Right. She's looking around and she thinks it's a beautiful day, and everybody's having fun, and he's just wants to get out of there.
And who's the fool? That's Chris Elliott. Chris Elliott, the cameraman who's always doing something stupid.
Right.
So you put these characters in a situation, and you kind of watch them go.
Right.
You watch them react. In Bill Prady, who's one of the executive producers of The Big Bang Theory, says, with his 4 iconic characters, he says he doesn't outline, he just sets up a premise and watches what his characters do. He just follows them.
Right.
So archetype is the idea that you're not in control. Your characters are in control. And you choose your archetypes not only to create action and movement, but also because it's not about the dialogue. It's not about the funny things you're writing. It's about the characters.
Right. Now I get it. I definitely understand it now, especially using that as an example. And when you were talking about sitcoms, can you tell everybody the story about how sitcoms, the history of sitcoms? Because I really got that. I thought that was amazing. Like, everybody looks at sitcoms as like something that was created right in this century, but then you talk about like.
Basically, if you're wanting to talk about a sitcom, you're talking about a form in which you have the same characters and they reappear all the time, except every week or so there's a different situation. And that's what the Commedia was. The Commedia was a group
and I had no idea. That was awesome.
8 or 10, 12 or 14 archetypical characters. And those were, because the actors were like in a troupe, and there was no casting that, if you played the young lover this week, you were the young lover. That was your whole career. So you had, and this is during the Middle Ages, the beginning of the Renaissance. Not a lot of people were literate. Very few people could read or write. So you weren't having playwrights write out funny scripts. You basically were saying, okay, here's these characters, here's this situation. You come on here, you exit there, and they improvise the whole thing. So sitcoms are really an extension of that improv theater form where you have archetypical characters in a specific situation and seeing how they perform. But what makes sitcoms so verbal, for the first 30 years or 40 years of sitcom, is that modern American sitcoms come out of radio.
Right.
In fact, many of the first sitcoms on television were radio shows.
Wasn't The Honeymooners a radio show?
I Love Lucy was a radio show.
I Love Lucy.
The Jack Benny Show was a radio show.
Mm-hmm.
And so you couldn't show characters. You had to tell stories, and jokes and dialogue became very important. And so in the beginning, you had sitcoms being very joke-based. Mm-hmm. But now, if you look at Veep, if you look at Silicon Valley episodes, Transparent, what you're finding sitcoms kind of getting away from the stricture of having to come up with 3 jokes per page and telling stories based on character.
Right.
Seinfeld was one of the first ones to do that, because if you look at a Seinfeld, it isn't set up joke, set up joke, set up joke. It's characters going through the day, occasionally saying things that we see as funny, but they don't mean it as funny. A great example of that is the great episode in Seinfeld, The Contest, when they're all going to see who can hold out
right.
from masturbating the longest.
Right.
And it all starts out when George comes in to the diner and he says, what's wrong? He says, my mother caught me. Caught you doing what? I was alone. There was a cosmopolitan there. So they all laugh about that, and so they all want to make a bet, and so they all bet $100, and Elaine says, I want in on this, and everybody says, no, it's different for a girl. It's
right.
different from a girl, and I forget who says it, but somebody says, it's like shaving, and Elaine says, oh, that's baloney. I shave my legs. And Kramer goes, not every day. and what he's doing is he's not, it's a funny reply. It plays as something we laugh at, but he doesn't mean it as a joke.
Right.
And if you look at that and put that next to any page from a 1970 sitcom, you can see the difference between wisecrack, set up, wisecrack. And in Seinfeld, it's not. It's characters expressing themselves. And occasionally the expressions, because they're crafted by great writers, are exactly what will make an audience laugh, but not the intention of the characters to say something funny.
Yeah, and the way they did that show, too, because I remember seeing it live when it was on back in the day, was that you didn't need much dialogue for the rest of the time, because as the show progresses and they're slamming their $100 bills on Jerry,
right.
you didn't have to say anything. They did a whole show without really they didn't have to say what happened. They just slammed the money down and walk out,
They look through the window, they see this naked woman. Kramer kind of looks at her for a second, goes off stage. A second later, he comes back. I'm out. Because that was enough for him.
Right. That was an awesome show. That was great. So let's talk about what you're doing right now, because you said you're writing another book. So that's awesome. I'm really happy about that.
Yeah. And
but your day-to-day life, you're doing workshops? Are they like every weekend, or do you do them every 6 months?
No, I do 1 or 2 a year in Los Angeles, and then I like a strolling troubadour. I go to different places when they ask me, when they need me, or even if they don't need me. So in 2017, Los Angeles at the end of January, and then Denver in the beginning of March. I'm going to be at Second City for a day. I'm very, very excited about that. To do 1-day workshop on March 11th. Then I'm in London, April, I think it's 29th and 30th. It's that week, last weekend in April. The next week I'm in Munich. I think that's the 6th and 7th. And this hasn't been nailed down. It hasn't been chiseled in stone yet, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to be in Tel Aviv March 27th, 28th, 29th, and 30th.
Wow, that's amazing. That you get to travel
Maybe
around.
Jakarta,
It doesn't matter what
Jakarta.
country. Yeah, it doesn't matter what country you're in, right? I mean, everybody wants to learn about comedy.
Yeah, and it's funny. People always have the idea that senses of humor are so different in different countries, and it may be true that the culture is different, and we're people in. Oh, and I'm in London in April, and the Brexit is very big, and you can't make a lot of Brexit jokes specifically about English politicians in America. People won't know what you're talking about. So that's true, but whether you're in London or Los Angeles or Chicago or Jakarta, people get married, people have wives, people have husbands, people have annoying teenage children, people mess up, people lie, people pretend, so you're still human.
Right.
So it's comedy tells universal truths about people.
Wow, I really appreciate you telling us all about comedy because I learned so much by reading your book, and I thank you so much for giving us your time, and it was really fun. I'm really glad we did this. Thank you. Good luck in everything.